currently a professor at Université du Québec at Montréal. We'll talk a little bit about resilience, the general aspects, and actually for the rest, for a good part of the lecture, actually you're going to be doing the work. So I'm going to propose an activity because I believe that to really understand resilience, you have to experience sort of the questions that we had to kind of deal with. Because I can sit here and tell you about all the different concepts of resilience and who did that and that scale and blah blah blah, but I think that actually what's more enriching is you actually think about it, you actually test it out, and let's talk about it. And then I'd like to finish with a sort of case studies. So during my postdoctoral studies, I worked on a project on the stories of resilience. So I'll finish on what exactly we did, the decisions we made to come to that methodology. And also we'll finish with a finished product, sort of like a video of one of the communities we worked with. So sort of that's the workshop plan. A little bit about me. So I'm originally from Winnipeg. So Winnipeg is in the middle of Canada, in Manitoba. I'm from I'm from a French community or Francophone community, Saint-Boniface. So I was born in Saint-Boniface. I grew up going to primary school, secondary school, high school, university, all in French. So I'm one of those pockets in Canada where, we're a linguistic minority. We live around a sea of Anglophones. And all throughout my childhood, I was told that, stop speaking English, don't speak English, stop speaking English, don't speak English, and then just kept on repeating it. We had detentions at high school if we spoke English in the hallways. We were punished for speaking English at school, in primary school, in high school. University was kind of like, well, whatever. You're adults now. You get to choose whatever you want. What I want to kind of share with you is that I come from a community where maintaining your linguistic kind of knowledge is very important. Now you only realize that when you're an adult, but when you're a kid, you just say, oh, well, I kept being punished for being for speaking English. And that's because of assimilation. It's always fighting assimilation. So I was brought up in a French-Canadian family. We were told that we were, we had Irish descents. We had Dutch descendants. We had actually my great-great-grandfather was Dutch. My great-great-great-grandfather was Irish. I had another French descendant, obviously from France, where my name comes from. And then we had German. And so obviously my genealogy was very important. My dad, imparted us our family history and where everything came. And sort of blended into that, we were told that we were Métis. At that point, when I was a kid, being Métis was, this is just who you are. And then you just kind of like, you're not quite French-Canadian. You're not quite, Anglo-Canadian. You're just Métis, that's who you are, period. So there's 3 Aboriginal groups in Canada. There are the Inuit, which mainly live in Arctic Canada. There are the First Nations, which are what you would call, Aboriginals. They're more stereotypical, kind of like your Indians. And then there's the Métis. So those are the 3 main Aboriginal groups that are considered on the Canadian, Canadian Charter of Rights as the 3 founding, or part of the 3 founding peoples of Canada. And so Métis historically come from a European descendant and a First Nation descendant, and then they married, and then they had kids, and then their kids had kids with other mixed bloods. And then that just kind of grew, and that created a whole different group of mixed blood people. Now, mixed blood is definitely not the word that we use, but this whole nation is what we call the Métis Nation. So it's part of the 3 groups that have a different identity, different histories, different histories or different realities from the other groups. So, resilience is a hot topic right now, right? Because in the last 5, I'd say even 10 years, in psychology in the last 20 years, there's been a huge move towards positive psychology. So psychology started out as medicine started out with, most of healing was, you've got a problem, let's fix your problem. Let's figure out your problem first and then fix it, right? And so after one point, people say, yeah, but not everyone has a problem, or some people don't have problems. So this is positive spin on health and that's sort of where psychology is, personally, I think that psychology is popular now because it kind of follows this thread of like, well, let's focus on the positive. Let's look at what people are doing well, or why they're doing well in their situation. There are resiliency scales. There's a 25-item resiliency scale. There's a 10-item resiliency scale. There's a bunch of different scales, for sure. I'm not against scales. I love scales for different things. I don't think that resilience can be scaled because you'll see how complex. I think that resilience is it's a huge basket in which we put a bunch of other terms. And so to come up with a resiliency scale, first we have to define resilience, identify exactly what we want, and then make up a scale. Self-esteem is relatively easy. Self-esteem is self-evaluation of global worth. I can evaluate how you find yourself, your worth in this. So it's a relatively compact and very succinct concept. Resilience for me is way too wide. So to come up with a resiliency scale, yes, we can all come up with, and there exist. But then you could have like 25 resiliency scales basically, and they'd all be valid and they're all their own right. So when someone wants to use a resiliency scale, that's when I say, well, first of all, identify what you want to evaluate and see if that scale is appropriate or if it evaluates what you think it evaluates. It's kind of like Beck depression. Now, depression is a very, it's been delimited quite well. And that's why the BDI, the Beck Depression Inventory, is pretty, yes, there are problems with it. It's not the ideal, but it's very good because it's a fairly defined phenomenon, and you can evaluate the symptoms and how it progresses. Resilience, well, we'll talk about resilience, and I think you're going to leave this by saying, oh my God, I have no idea what's going on. You'll probably leave more confused than you are now. Because in my opinion, resilience is such a cultural resilience, community resilience, individual resilience, intergenerational resilience. I mean, then you're going to, oh my God, because you don't really talk about intergenerational depression. Yes, you've got depressional, transmission. So that's what I mean by, I don't think that the Beck depression can be used everywhere in the world. No. No scale can be used anywhere in the world. So what do you think resilience is? Well, you've got your idea already. What do you think, guys? Can anyone who would like to share what they think resilience is? If you had to explain to your grandma the word resilience, what would you say? The reason I use that grandma example is because grandmas are down-to-earth, intelligent people that should understand normal language, right? So if you can't boil it down to intelligent, normal language, then it's too complicated. So you see how, let's imagine we wanted to create a scale about your different perspectives on resilience. Do you see what I mean with a scale? Okay, you see how, it depends on well, not well, you get stronger through it, it depends on the social construct or the social construction of the context you see how complicated that would be to make up a scale? Give me one item on that scale that would represent all of these phenomena or all of these ideas. I would not even try, right? I would have to, we'd have to construct a scale for, going through choppy waters, bouncing back, navigating through, and bouncing off. Or you see how complicated, and that's my resistance toward developing your resilience scale. Or the use of the scale, make sure you know exactly what it measures, because it could be a specific perspective, which is fine. I mean, we could build a scale, and that's fine. So that's my point with scales. Well, actually, we haven't identified an objective perspective. Actually, most of it was subjective perspective, bouncing back, navigating, the social construct especially or it is, I feel as if I have to do this and so on. Some people say, well, if their mother's an alcoholic, if their father's an alcoholic, or they've left, or they don't have a father, they got 8 brothers and sisters at home, and they just lift off all the risk factors, but yet they have a PhD. Some people point to these people and say, look, they're resilient, as sort of like an example of objective factors. Because some people, you could list off all of the reasons why they shouldn't be well, and say, but look at this massive list of why they shouldn't be well, but look, they are okay, right? And so we could define resilience as, well, look at these people. For example, Aboriginal people should be dead by now. We shouldn't be here. With all the oppression, with all the voluntary kind of plans to kind of exterminate us, we shouldn't be here, right? However, we are. Sometimes it works, actually. Do you know in Canada, in Eastern Canada, the Beothics? Have you heard of them? They were the Aboriginals in Newfoundland. They actually don't exist anymore because they were exterminated. There are indigenous people all over the world, groups that have been exterminated. Now, you could say that they're no longer resilient because actually the oppression and the extermination actually work. But all over the world, there's still a lot of, children from either alcoholic families or depressive mothers, or you can name off all of these reasons why people shouldn't be well. And you've got people that rise up from the occasion or rise up from the choppy waters, right? So we could use that as an example. However, then you'd have to kind of put out all this massive list of risk factors and say, if you have this, if you this, the amount of this, kind of gets really complicated pretty quickly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, then you say, well, look, if you could still live and help your child, depending on what you do with your affliction, of course. Yeah, of course. You'd say because you're navigating through your life with this affliction or this difficulty, and you're trying to do the best you can, and you've imparted in your children, enough motivation to continue and not be like you or whatever to continue for sure. Yeah, you can see that the person is. Subjective perspective. So you ask people, are you resilient? You just ask people, what do you think? There are self-report measures, and this is the scales. You say on a scale of 1 to 7, or very much to very little, or whichever. You could say how do you rate on this, which we could do. And then there are narratives. We could ask about stories. Stories are much more complicated to ask because, well, you get this incredibly rich, information, and oftentimes in narratives, people won't give you a straight answer, right? They'll tell you the story and they understand it, but it's incredibly rich. The other thing is, so if you wanted to, let's say we wanted to investigate, resilience of school-age children, who would we ask to investigate school-age children in a in a poor neighborhood or maybe even a rich neighborhood? Who would we ask, or where would we get the information about resilience or the process of stabilization on school-age children? Very uncommon because we think that these little 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, they just tell a story, right? So it's a little complicated, right? Because to actually get, the resilience process of a 6 to 8-year-old group in a poor and in a rich neighborhood, well, normally, like you said, we ask the teachers, we get the objective perspective. And we actually get the objective perspective of the students and, the parents and the teachers on a self-report measure of some sort. The point that I wanted to bring up here is, okay, that's how we've done it in the past. Is it the best way? It's one way. Do you get the full story? Maybe not. So again, just who you ask makes a big difference. Right? Because, do you ask someone who should know, the person themselves? Do you ask people from outside the group? You see how just that, who who do you get the person, or who do you interview, or who do you give the scale to? You have to think about, because it's not that you should ask everyone in all town, everyone to get it. It's just that you have to identify the person that you want the information from. In this case, in the school studies especially, they wanted sort of the professor's perspective, because the professor has a pretty good idea of the comparison between two children. And so the idea, they assume that the professor has a perspective of the global group, and they could kind of compare who is more or less. And then if they ask the parent, then the parent, obviously they would probably compare to their siblings. That's usually, it's a comparative analysis of some sort. It's a relative analysis, because they assume that the teacher has this kind of global kind of view. Is it the only view? Who knows? What happens if the child says, well, the reason why I beat up Johnny is because before school, Johnny always takes my lunch or whatever, and that's why I have this negative, behavior when I come to school. But the teacher sees that as a bad attitude or negative, and says, no, they're not very, very resilient because they can't follow instructions and so on. So all that to say that just who you ask can be complicated, or you have to carefully decide. Or you have to decide very carefully. What type of resilience? We've kind of identified through the examples a few types of resilience. We've talked about resilient children, Billy, in a sense, or a family. So even at what level do you want to look at the resilience process? Let's say I'm going through choppy waters, or I'm in the process of stabilization. Am I the only person involved in this process? Likely not. I might have a support group. I might have my family. I might have my friends. All these things are things to consider. There's individual resilience, there's communal resilience, family resilience, societal resilience. I mean, you could kind of see it as the concentric circles. There you go. That's my hybrid brain kind of short-circuiting. The resilience can be very close to you or very far. You could benefit from the governmental subsidies. I mean, you don't feel it, but you live through it, and that in a sense could be part of the resilient process. If you have legal action, you can get to. Well, that could be part of the resilience process. If someone hurts me, I have someone to go to kind of say, punish this person. Well, you could say in a sense that is resilience, because I can find justice. Now that obviously resides in more the society, or more the much larger. So the other thing, even to complicate things even more, or to complicate things, do we look at one time point, or do we look at multiple time points? In developmental resilience, we have looked at years, but sometimes we have to look at across the lifespan. And we've actually looked across generations, because generations have different social contexts, different social pressures, different stigmatization, different discrimination, and so even generations. So I think I've made a case for resilience is incredibly complicated, and that's why I hesitate to put one definition, first of all, and also to put one scale, because it really depends on what part of the process you want to look at. When I asked you, what would you tell your grandmother? Well, when we ask people, what would you tell your grandmother? A lot of people say, well, he is just resilient. They assume that everyone understands resilience. It's like they don't need to define it. That was one thing that we found very interesting. This concept of resilience was kind of ingrained in all of us. We understand sort of what it is. It's hard for us to define it, but we use the word, quite not frequently, but we can use the word. They're a resilient bunch. So either he or she, or they'd say, oh, that's a resilient family. They had to go through tough times, and look, they're doing well now. Or they got through the tough time, or so on. So they can refer to also. After all that, they showed a lot of resilience in terms of after adversity, or during adversity, they showed a lot of resilience. Some people have defined resilience, especially in the earlier years of resilience research, they define it as personality trait. You are a resilient person or a non-resilient person. You have high self-esteem. If you have high self-esteem, you will be able to go through life and face adversity. If you have a secure attachment as a child, you will be able to go to school and face the social pressures of school. If you have insecure attachment, you'll be vulnerable. They talked about vulnerability, and that was, or your temperament. You've got a good temperament, you've got a less. We've moved away from these personality traits because they're a little bit more, they're very restraining. But some people kind of used personality traits to identify. Some people, or is someone resilient or not resilient? Can someone be not resilient in your opinion? Okay, I think we all assume that someone, or at one point someone can be resilient. Now, can someone be non-resilient or show non-resilience? Is it possible? You mentioned that it might not be them, but it might be the context they're living through is very, very difficult for them to get through. So it's not like it's an inherent fallibility. It's not that they have a problem. It's just that it's really tough for them to get through it. So there are contexts in which someone may not engage in a resilient process, and there are, okay, so if you look at it as an outcome then, are there people that are just not resilient? They're just terrible. They have terrible social skills, terrible intellectual skills, terrible problem-solving skills. They're incredibly anxious. Are there people that are
It's possible, yes.
So one of your main concerns is that people are tagging Arctic communities as, oh, they're inherently resilient, therefore they're going to get through this stuff. However, they've neglected the context to support the context in which they will be able to get through this stuff. So they're tagging them, oh, they're a resilient bunch anyway, so they'll get through climate change, and if we extract these resources and dig a big mine there, they'll get through it because look at all the, look, they're already resilient. However, they had the power to choose the way they wanted to be resilient in the past, and now they might not they might not because whatever, sedentarization and so on. Interesting. It's interesting how we use a perspective to say to cause more problems almost, or we can, yeah. Can someone or a group not be resilient? So the reason I asked this question is to see, well, because if someone cannot be resilient and someone can be resilient, there are two end there are two end kind of there can be two anchors. But I think what we've done now is we've kind of erased those anchors. And if you erase those anchors, it's just kind of floating there, right? And if it's floating there, then we're getting closer toward what I would argue to be a process. It's this continuum where you're moving forward, either from individual or context. You're moving across time. It's kind of like this big bubble. Now, you see how unclear I am right now? Yeah, of course, because if I have the power to label you as resilient or not, then I have the power to take that label off. And then if I tag you with being resilient, you don't need resources, you're okay. I've got the power to give you resources or not. So of course. Yes. Now you're referring to it's called a self-fulfilling prophecy, or if you tell someone, which is the whole problem with labels, right? We won't get into that right now. But I think what we're going towards is, like I said, I mean, you're going to leave today with more questions, which I think is my goal here. I want you to ask more questions and for it to be more nebulous, because as soon as it becomes more clarified and specific, that's when someone can claim power over it, take the power away, give you something. Oh, you're you're a bunch of alcoholics. Let's intervene. That's exactly what developmental teams do, right? Oh, look, these poor Haitian families. Let's bring all this money into it and rebuild these schools. I'm not saying that, it's bad or good, but I mean, what I want to do is I want to take resilience away from this is that, this is this, and kind of have you decide for what you think is appropriate considering your situation, your context, or the work that you would be using it in. Yep.
Do you think that, I'm kind of posing my own views on this, but do you think that by doing those interventions, they're in fact taking away from the community's natural resilience?
I think it really depends on the way that the interventions or the discussions are developed. I mean, it really depends. I mean, some interventions are fantastic because they involve. It really depends on who is, how it's done, is it received or not. I mean, that's when you get into this participatory action kind of philosophy, which is normal now. Before it used to be a team of health, whatever, psychiatrist, psychologist, nurse would come into communities, whether they're northern or and they would do their thing and then they'd leave. Now you don't do that anymore. You have to involve the local perspectives and so on. So I think we're definitely moving, and the reason why there's been this shift is because we obviously realize that if you do what you do where you do it, here it doesn't work. I mean, it's as simple as that. So I have to ask you, what's the context, what's going on? So I think it's happening in, human development, human ecology, everything. Everything is kind of like we're more and more saying, okay, well, I can't just use my tool, my hammer, on wooden nails here, because my hammer is just going to destroy these wooden nails. So I think that it really comes down to how it's done. Because sometimes, actually, some research has shown that it's not what you do, it's how you do it. Or that you're even there or not there at the appropriate time. For example, I mean, I have a colleague who does suicidal or research in suicide in Africa, and he's shown that their intervention actually hinders suicide. So whatever they have in Africa, in Western Africa, they do it well. But when they come in with their teams, they're like, it doesn't work as well as whatever the mother system they have there. So it's kind of like, well, okay, so maybe there are places where you shouldn't be, or whatever you're doing, don't do it, or stop doing it, or whatever. So, it's not maybe what you do, is maybe just the presence of someone else. Who knows? What's the difference between resilience and coping? You've mentioned cope. Actually, you're the first person to mention cope.
I mentioned cope.
Yeah, you say the Sri Lankans are very good at coping with the tsunami. What's the difference between resilience and coping? Because there's a huge literature on coping, right? Coping is massive literature. Okay, just I don't have any answer. I'm just kind of bringing out the different literatures and slightly different contexts. Here's the activity I'd like to propose. Think up of 2 questions. And we'll split the group in 2, interviewees and interviewers. You'll ask your 2 questions to someone. You'll engage in a short discussion, maybe 5 minutes, concerning your 2 questions. And then we'll flip it. The interviewees, group 1 will be a run. So there'll be 2 rounds. And then afterwards, we'll come to a round table and see what, if you've, just your experience, to see, well, have you learned anything different? Have you confirmed your ideas, and so on. I want for you to experience, the complicatedness of first asking the appropriate question or asking a question, either appropriate or a question or a specific question. And then second of all, understanding what the other person is sharing with you. Because at this point, we've all assumed that if I ask a question, I get a clear answer, right? What I'd like for you to do is experience that. Is that the case? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And so first, I guess the first step of the activity is you have to consider, or you have to make up 2 questions. In making up your questions, first consider what type of information you'd like, or you're looking for, or you would like. Second of all, consider the information that you'd like people to share with you. So there's kind of like, I'm asking for something, and try to consider what the other person will actually give you. The reason I'm telling you that is because sometimes what you ask is not what you get. So sometimes you have to reframe what you ask to get what you get, or to get what you want to get. It's kind of like, what did you do last weekend? Oh, I had a great time. My family went visiting, and then we went to da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You get what you get the chronological kind of evidence. You say, how are you feeling today? Yesterday, I was blah, 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 blah. I didn't ask about yesterday, I asked about today. But they're answering because yesterday affected how they asked today. So that's sort of the complicatedness of what I'd like for you to experience. First, make up 2 questions that you'll ask a person. The person will answer these, and then we will flip and we'll change the groups around. So at this point, make up 2 questions that you will ask someone else in this group about either what is resilient, or you can ask them, how have you been resilient, or who do you think is resilient? I don't know. It's really up for you to decide. What part of resilience do you want to ask someone else? Could be either about them, could be about someone else, another group. It could be about their family. It could be about just concept of. Really, really depends. For whom did this happen? You asked a question, you got the answer you wanted. Thank you very much. See you later. No? No one. Did you pose the right answer? Pose the right question? Did you ask the wrong question? Who thinks they asked the wrong question? Let's say she says, my family helped me through this. And then you ask, how did your family help you through this? Right? Example. Sometimes that's difficult to answer, right? Yes. Were the 2 questions related to each other?
Yep.
Okay. And so let's say the first question was kind of like an opening statement, to engage in a discussion.
Yeah.
And then let's start digging a little bit, let's start exploring together. So that's normally, when you engage in a discussion, that's sort of what you kind of want to do. Start with one. Okay. Why did you choose a family, someone close to you, and not you? Because then you're projecting what the other person did. What interests you in what you think the other person did to get? Do you understand what I'm asking? Instead of saying, what did you get through? And how did you get through it? Why the indirect way instead of the direct way? I agree. Because I can only interpret in someone else what I know myself. If I don't see, it takes one to know one type of deal. If I don't know something, then it's very difficult for me to see it in someone else. So it's a very, it's a good technique for sure. Anyone else or any other? Was it difficult? Was it easy?
It was difficult.
To either ask or answer. It could be either both.
And I thought as well the most difficult thing was trying to narrow it down to two questions. Otherwise, you almost have to kind of reformulate it. The second question that I asked was like about describing an event which you think displays your own resilience. Which from that, I have to go into more detail than I felt like I had to ask more questions.
Sure. To go in. So just formulated questions.
Yeah, like I'm kind of reformulating as you go as well. You might go in with a structured interview, but you'll feel while you're doing it that there are more things that you have to ask.
Of course, yeah. Engaging in discussion. I asked Will a question. He took about 30 seconds, maybe even a minute to think about. Did that happen to anyone? You ask a question and they actually have to think about it before answering. Or where all the answers like, I've got an answer kind of ready to go, or I can at least start the question and I'll kind of fabricate something as you go. I asked Will, when your son will be 18 or your daughter will be 18 years old, what will you tell her or him to be well in their life? And he was like, well, first he had to open his mouth. He went, and then he started looking up and he was like, jeez. And then he asked me the context, are they leaving? Will I see them tomorrow? Sort of like all this stuff. And it was like you have to fabricate the scenario. And I said, you might see them tomorrow, you might see them in 10 years, I don't know. But you want to share this capsule of knowledge. And again, his eyes kind of wide and was like, it took a little time to think about it and came to an answer for sure. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Maybe. That's a terrible answer, but yeah,
No.
I guess, you could say, yeah, because again,
what
what could you have done in that scenario? Oftentimes, that's a follow-up question to what happened in the past. Oh, this happened, and I felt terrible. And for a long time, I felt terrible, or whatever. And usually you follow, well, what could you have done to either shorten the symptoms or shorten the pain or help? And so sometimes it's a follow-up question and related to an event or what. Sometimes the event is still happening, right? Sometimes the event, the trauma, the challenge is ongoing. So in that case, you're going, well, what are you doing about it? So which kind of answers, which kind of comes to the same. What I wanted to do through the activity is really to kind of give you a flavor as to, well, okay, first of all, figuring out the questions you want to ask, getting the information you think you want, and then do you actually get the information, and then how do you make sense of the information? Did some of you kind of get an answer and you're like, oh my God, I have to ask a lot of other questions to kind of understand it? Or was it all clear, or did it kind of follow in your same perspective? Was it different perspective, similar perspective? Did you have to make sense of it, really understand it? Or was it kind of like, oh yeah, I understand. Yeah, for sure. I get it. I get you very easily. Making sense of the other answers was easy? Kind of, yes? No? Maybe so? Good. So you've experienced firsthand, this nebulous kind of ball that I'm trying to create. We'll finish this off with, I'll describe to you sort of the Stories of Resilience project. We'll go through the interview protocol just to give you an indication of how we actually, what decided. We'll go through relatively briefly because I want to finish with sort of outputs, like reports. We won't go through the analyses and what we actually found. I'll let you go through that at a different time, and there are different materials for that. So the Stories of Resilience, the basic idea of the Stories of Resilience project was to investigate resilience from Aboriginal perspectives. Now you can understand from the discussion we've had this morning that when we mean Aboriginal perspectives, we'll mean the context of Aboriginals and the identity of Aboriginals, right? You know, this how do they perceive? Because that, in the literature, generally speaking, resilience was mainly mainly from an individualistic point of view, in terms of, people that are individuals, or, individuals that engage in processes and things, is much less viewed as either a group or a communal, and much less so from a cultural perspective. How can I draw on my cultural identity to help me through things? Because we all know that cultural identity is an incredibly rich way of making meaning, and we all know that meaning making is incredibly powerful. Making meaning of an episode can help us immensely through things, and cultural perspectives, religion, spirituality, whatever you want to call it, can help us make meaning of an event and help us through. Will had mentioned the Sri Lankans after the tsunami using a lot of astrology. That's a great example of using this worldview, these concepts, to extract meaning from an event and actually help us through these. So one of the main goals was to ask people from different contexts, different cultures, and different situations what they think resilience, and how have they gone through. It's also a way of giving a voice to traditional knowledge, because in many different contexts, traditional knowledge is actually it's calculated. It's certain people are given the role of sharing traditional knowledge. Some people are the traditional or knowledge holders, and so we wanted to see, are the evidence of resilience concepts or resilience teachings in the traditional knowledge. And we basically wanted to redefine the concept of resilience, or redefine, at least put it in literature, from First Nations, from Inuit and Métis perspectives in a Canadian context, and also from an urban and rural communities. Because we all, First Nations, like you mentioned, or like you visited in Monday, Kahnawake is an urban reserve. Not all the reserves are urban, right? And so we wanted to also investigate, are there differences, or how does it kind of play out when you're way out in the boonies, in the bush, versus beside a massive city. Our main goal was to investigate the shared aspects of resilience, either within the community or within age groups. And we haven't gotten to across communities, but within one community, what is common, and also what is distinct within the community. Because as you'll see, we asked elders, adults, and young adults, so 3 generations. And so we looked at what is shared amongst those 3 generations and what is distinct among those 3 generations. And that was our basic kind of starting point. That's where we decided that's where we're going to start, and that's how we're going to decide the questions that we're going to ask. Here are the different communities that were involved. And so the 2 main that I'm going to finish with is Kahnawake, and then this is where I'm from, and this is my own community. You'll see that the Métis, community is weird in a Métis context. The general process within the communities is, first we developed a collaboration. This is essential, right? We have to develop a community advisory group, partners within the communities. You don't go in helicopter research with your protocols and interview people and leave. This takes a lot of time. We all understand that it's very important. It takes a lot of resources, but it's essential, because you get so much more out of the project, and it's so much more meaningful, so much more applicable. Anyways, I don't have to sell you on the benefits, especially with the participatory action research you saw on project on Monday, right? We had to go, or we invited the local community partners to engage in the ethics process. So we asked, yes, we had the hospital's ethics, we had the university ethics. We also asked the community, can you review this? Do you have any questions? Can you check and vet it from your perspective also? And then we developed a team for each community. So Kahnawake had a team, the Métis had a team, Iqaluit had a team, Eskasoni had a team, so on. The main idea behind the process was key informants. So these are key people that understand the history, have maybe are recognized as knowing a lot of people, knowing a lot. They're just usually older people, actually all older people, and what we would call kind of key informants. And our community advisory board usually recommended these people. You say, well, start with these people because they'll give you an overview of the community, of the people within this community, and sort of the context of what's going on. And then we had focus groups or talking circles, depending on who you're talking or what context you're in. And then with the Métis, we had groupe de jasette, which are chatting circles. We had focus groups with elders, with adults, with young adults. In Kahnawake, we had youth. With the Métis, we actually had an intergenerational focus group, which was fantastic. So we had elders, youth, and adults all together in one focus group, in addition to an elders group and so on. So the focus group was basically to get a sort of, not really a community perspective, but many people from the same community talking about the same things. Versus the individual interviews was, what is your story? What is your story? What is your story? So as you can see, we had key informants that gave us an overview. We had focus group with different age groups. Sometimes it was this 3 age groups in the same. So it was kind of like a cross-sectional kind of interview. And then we had individual interviews with, again, elders, adults, and young adults. So you can see how we tried to cut across time, we tried to cut across generations, and also get all these three generations to come together and try to tell us the same story at the same time, which never happened, right? But that was the idea behind sort of who are we going to ask these questions, which comes down to, the initial discussion is who do we ask what? So this is what we decided. The reason why we wanted the different generational group is because we know that, within the last 50 years, even 60 years, there's been a lot of change within communities, whether you're urban, whether you're rural, there's been a lot of changes. So we wanted to kind of get that flavor as to how has these events changed across time, and how has that influenced either one generation, and how has that influenced intergenerationally. So you can see how we can get extremely rich information and see how it progresses through time, even within. You see this nebulous ball kind of being built at this point? Maybe? You guys asked 2 questions. We asked a few more questions. So, we'll go through this relatively quickly. The main kind of focus was we asked people, either from a group perspective or an individual perspective, what are your personal or community challenges? And we focused on how have you gotten through it. So actually very similar questions to what some of you asked here. So we asked, let's identify a challenge that is either now, that happened in the past, or that you might see in the future. And more importantly, how have you gotten through it? And that's the lingo we kind of use throughout the interview. How have you gotten through it? We don't say, how have you been resilient through it? Or, we just say, how have you gotten through it? Or how are you dealing with it now? Which, for us, was a way of kind of talking to our grandmothers, right? And everyone can understand, and everyone can come up with some kind of answer. We asked for signs of wellness. So we wanted to see, can you give me a prototype of who is well and why are they well? We also asked about words and expressions related to resilience. What are the types of words that you would use to say either she's resilient, that's a resilient process, they're a resilient bunch, or what are the kind of things that pop to mind? Oh, he's tough as nails. We dig in our heels. These are all expressions that we use to refer to, either going up against or resisting or empowering ourselves, so on. We asked examples of resilience, and that was kind of like sort of what you guys did. Tell us about someone else and what they did to be resilient. So it's a way for us to kind of get this prototype within people's minds about who do you think is a resilient person or a resilient family or a resilient community in your mind? To kind of get this concept of where does resilient or what does it look like in your mind, and how do you project it onto someone else, and tell us about them and tell us what. So it's a way of indirectly getting to people's own perspective of resilience. And that kind of gets to if I don't have a perspective of resilience, I can't see it somewhere else, right? And then finally, we asked about traditional stories, traditional songs, jokes, whatever that might be related to resilience. And finally, we asked about knowledge sharing activities, or how would you impart? That's the question I asked Will. How would you impart your knowledge or your resilient process to the future generation? What do you tell people? What's the recipe you give them for being well in the future? Because again, that we interpret that as being, I have a recipe in my mind. I know what kind of worked for me. These are the important things in my mind, and I'd like to share that with someone else, and for hoping that they will use this to their benefit. And so I have to have constructed this recipe, constructed this, these ideas. And then future outlooks is, again, it's kind of like, what do you think is going to happen, and how are you going to face them? So it's more in the projection of future resilience, or what do we need to move forward? Because oftentimes we only talk about the past, right? What happened? We forget about the future, because the future, people could say we're doomed. Are they resilient? Are they engaging in a resilient process? They're saying we're doomed. We're going to be exterminated in next year, or in 50 years, we're not going to be here. We're going to all be assimilated. Well, it's a different process than saying, in the future, we're going to keep working, we're going to keep fighting. So that gives us, again, this temporal kind of perspective on people's process. And then finally, the end of the project is we ask the community advisory board, so our team members within the community, so what do we do with this information? What do you guys want out of this? And again, this is very important at a community level, because you want to leave the project and give them something that might be useful for them, or that they might appreciate, other than a report. Because reports are fun, right? If someone came to your community, your family, and said, I'm going to study your family, and then at the end they gave you a report, would you be happy? I wouldn't be happy. I want something a little bit more useful, more engaging, I don't know, something that... So we asked them, and then within each community we set up kind of potential ways, and so that was our knowledge exchange or knowledge sharing part. This project obviously takes a lot of people, and so just to give you, this is a very quick slide as to how many people actually are involved. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. We worked with the Manitoba Métis Federation, as you know, they're associated in councils, right? They're a federation.
Yeah.
And so we work with the councils.
Okay, like a local?
Exactly, 2 locals. Well, actually, one that's part of the Métis Federation, and one that isn't. Conseil des Arts Goulet and l'Union Nationale Métis, which isn't part of it. Because the Métis are organized in very independent locals. Each local does whatever they want, kind of. So we worked with the locals. And a little bit with Lawrence Barkwell, so we first asked, this is the focus group and key informant interview. So actually we used the general key informant or focus group for the key informants and for the focus group. So it was the same interview when we were talking to a key informant and to a group of people. We asked, what are the challenges this community has faced? So we first wanted to get sort of like a groupal or a communal perspective, and how did the community get through these challenges? What are the things that help people in your community do well despite challenges? That is kind of like what you asked, right? So, how does this help you? How did family help you? How did your community help you? How did larger society help you? People looked at us, larger society? They were the source of the problem. And then we asked views of wellness. How can you tell someone is doing well in this community despite challenges? How can you tell the whole community is doing well? So you can have individuals, or you can have the group. And then we always had, obviously, follow-up questions to kind of either, for different reasons, what are signs of health or wellness in your community? And so again, it's kind of like the idea of, resilience is not necessarily bouncing back, it's going through, it's progressing through challenges and being functioning. Whether you're well or whether you're in top shape or you're 75%, you're functioning. So we wanted to get this idea of, well, what does it mean to function in this community? It means to stand up and to walk to work, or does it mean to wake up in the morning? Very different, right? Does it mean to be in full health, physical health and mental health, or does it just mean, hey, listen, I'm alive? That's well. So we wanted to get these different perspectives, because obviously the context, if you're shit out of luck, waking up in the morning is good enough, right? But if you're not, then it's a different story. And then we asked about language, words, expressions. What words would you describe to? What words would you use to describe a person that's resilient? What words would you describe a community that's resilient? So this is where people, it took them a little while because, these are words that we use in everyday language. It's not like we associate them with resilience per se. We just they're adjectives, they're nouns, they're expressions that we just use. So actually it was a tough question, because when you put someone on the spot and say, tell me the list of words that you refer to this, it's kind of difficult. But throughout the discussion, we pulled out these words just by people describing stuff, people describing other things. These expressions kind of naturally came out. Yes. Yes. So if they gave us a different language, or in their either native tongue or a different language, we say, so how do you, just so we know, just so we can transcribe, what does it mean in English, or can you translate it in English? But yeah, we would log it in. For example, Mohawks, many Mohawks or people from Kahnawake speak Mohawk, so they gave us Mohawk words which we then translated. We said we're going to use resilient, but what we really mean is how you got through things. And then people understood, okay, I get it. Some people understood resilience because, they've been to school and they've heard the word. Other people just said, but when you said, so we mainly used, getting through things. How would you sell? And then obviously these are guided questions, right? I mean, it's not like we read them word for word. In different context with the older people, for example, the elders would say, so how would you describe someone who has gotten through problems or challenges? They list off. You wouldn't necessarily use resilient in that context. We had a team in Iqaluit conduct the research with the Inuktitut, or with the Inuit, and they talked about what have you lived through your life, and what has helped you be here. And so, if you don't ask about the problem, they won't talk about the problem. But inevitably, they will talk about hardship or things that have made them stronger, or so on. And so, in that case, actually, they still talked about their life and what has helped them be here, which indirectly is a way of talking about just what their life. And actually, we don't necessarily we don't want to know about the problem per se. We're just using the context to see what have you done in the past to be here and to be well. And people are much more open to say, this is what's important for me in my life to be well. That's no problem. Because, you have to work hard, you have to wake up in the morning, you have to be persistent. This, they will tell us. They might not talk, some might not tell us about the problems per se, some might. But in any way, what we want to know is how have you come to be who you are now? Well, this is where the community advisory groups are. That's exactly why they're so important, because some of the questions actually were changed or eliminated in some contexts, because they're like, we don't talk about this in group, like you said, or we have to ask a different question. For sure, exactly. But the other thing is that if you can ask about community problems and people will answer, but people will not answer individual problems. Yes. Or the opposite. They won't answer community problems, but they'll talk about themselves because they don't want to talk in the name of other people. So again, that comes down to adapting to the different, but again, ultimately what we want is how have you come to be who you are now, right? We use the past to see how have you come to be who you are now. Yeah, and adaptability, this is a prototype, and then we adapt it and we massage it for every context. Yes. The research materials are online. So if you go mcgill.ca/resilience, for the project, we actually developed a research manual that you can download, and there's everything in it, the step-by-step guide, if you want more detail about that. For the Métis resilience, one of the issues we had is defining the community. Métis they're not set up in like reserves. I mean, they're basically families that live in different contexts, rural, So it's not like, you got a Métis community other than in Alberta, and you've got recognized areas. But I mean, it's not like Kahnawake where you got like a defined, border. I mean, it's not like Métis communities are like, here's a Métis community and here's it. Other than, like I said, the settlements in Alberta, which are much more defined. So first of all, we had to define who are the Métis or which Métis we wanted to talk about or talk with. And so we decided on the Franco-Métis, which again, doesn't necessarily represent all the Métis across Canada, nor even in Manitoba, because even in Manitoba, there are different types of Métis. So we actually narrowed it down to the Métis francophones, des métis canadiens français, des métis français, puis des franco-métis. These are all different terms to refer to kind of the same family of Métis. Basically, if you got a French name, you're very likely a franco-métis. We wanted to identify rural versus urban because some communities live by the lake and some live in downtown Winnipeg. So it really is very different. And then we wanted to look across generations. We interviewed many people from different groups and different generations, and this is where we had the intergenerational focus group. Yes, exactly. So we asked people who self-identify as being franco-métis or Canadien français or to come. So we produced a report. Actually, we had one of our artists draw this or paint this, and then we use this art throughout the report. This is a community report with all the details. This is, what goes on the shelf and unfortunately stays there for years, right? We had an executive summary. This is very important in my mind, that we can send to grandma and grandpa and uncle. That kind of boils it down to the gist of it. That's kind of pretty, right? So this is the executive summary. What you would send a CEO, I guess. We had a past elementary school teacher. So we developed 2 pedagogical kits that are literally in the Manitoba curriculum. So at grade 4, this is grade 4, teachers have to teach about, and this is all integrated because we had a teacher, so she understands exactly. We have to talk about le regroupement au Canada, vivre au Canada, or living in Canada, the history of Manitoba. So she has to teach about this, or teachers in grade 4 have to teach about this. They can come and take this kit that helps them teach about the history of Canada. And then we've adopted the results from our study into this pedagogical kit that a grade 4 teacher can use and do these activities. So they're activities, they go visit a park, they do interviews and so on. So we've adapted sort of the part of the methodology and part of the results for pedagogical kit for grade 4 and grade 9. This is, the reason why this happened is because, like I mentioned, we had a former teacher that was doing this. She knew how this worked and she knew people. And so this isn't just kind of like, hey, let's make a kit and give it to the education department. You have to engage in the discussion, see what is needed, so on. At the end, we invited everyone to come for a community forum. So we had a big party with a big dinner and music and dance. So we sent an invitation, come and party with us. Faites des capables qu'on a envoyé. DVD for everyone that has all of the materials in PDF, and the video that we created is basically the executive summary in a video format. You can, there's the last slide has the video of all of the stuff that we created for the project. I won't show you the Métis video because it's in French. What I'd like to show to you today is here's the, you can go on Vimeo there.com.nammer for the Métis project videos and Kahnawake, the one I'm going to show you right now. So we did the same thing. In Kahnawake, we did the executive summary, we did the community report, and we did the forum. We did a video of the forum, and then the vignette that I'll show and we'll finish with today. A lot of time. It's a project in and of its own. I love this stuff. I just breathe this stuff because it's so, well, first of all, it's really cool. But it's basically, you take a camera like that, you go take a picture, you video, and you build with, you know, iMovie now. It's crazy what you can do. Actually, what I'm going to show you, I built with iMovie. Pretty cool with, you know, minimal materials. Well, we ask, the videotapes are already, we ask people in the consent, and then whatever we use, we go back and say, can we use your voice? So obviously permission, yes. Permission is kind of like a different, well, what she asked me for this, it's kind of like a waiver. I don't need ethics because I'm not gathering new information. So, I'd like to finish with the vignette that we finished with Kahnawake. It's really cool because you went to Kahnawake, so you have a flavor of what or who, and you've heard people talk. So we're finished with the product that we had for Kahnawake.
Wat Gunuwaradu. My name is Morgan Gahanduni Phillips. Welcome to Resilient Voices from Kahnawake Vignette. We dedicate this vignette to Kahnawake in the spirit of wellness with the hope that we can share this knowledge with you as a way of giving back to the community and a way of helping to build upon the resilience that exists here in Kahnawake. This is only one result coming from a research project called Roots of Resilience, Stories of Resilience, Healing, and Transformation that began in Kahnawake back in June of 2007. Our goal was to identify Ganyangehaga sources of strengths, and we promised to return this information to you in an innovative way and do so with the assistance of a local community advisory group. This sub-project specifically identifies ways that Kahnawake Hirono, or Mohawks from Kahnawake, of different generations communicate resilience. By resilience, we mean ways that people get through challenges and obstacles in order to be well in life. Yawakoa to everyone who has participated in this project. To capture Kahnawake Hirono views of resilience, we first interviewed a few key people in the community to hear what they think resilience is about.
Well, one of the things that causes us to be so resilient, and oftentimes that we are adaptable to new situations in our community and also in our lives, is that we hold steadfast to our language and culture. Nothing seems to sway us or deter us from continuing practicing our language and our culture. And within our culture, there is that health and wellness part of it.
We then held 6 focus groups and interviewed 20 people between the ages of 16 and 79 and gathered your personal stories and perspectives about resilience. Age group categories are youth, young adults, adults, and elders. Over the next few minutes, I'll highlight some of the shared and distinct ways that resilience is viewed, lived, and communicated by different generations of the Mohawks of Kahnawake. Across generations, people have lived through different eras which have brought distinct challenges to Kahnawake Hirono and therefore distinct ways of getting through these challenges. For instance, elders often spoke of resilience in terms of survival and overcoming physical hardship.
It was a challenge to survive, but it was always a way.
Adults often spoke of being resilient against colonization and from significant events they have lived through, such as residential schools, the Oka crisis, and the takeover of education and health and social services.
So what do you think has made us resilient? The government has made us resilient. They tried so hard, but all it did was make us stronger. Well, they tried to assimilate us, and they tried, like, with residential schools, and they just, it backfired on them. Because it only made us more resilient and more, made our skin tougher.
Some identified personal sources of resilience, such as mindsets and personality characteristics, as ways of overcoming adversity. Digging deep inside oneself to find inner strength and courage is one way people get through challenges, whereas others rely more heavily on family support, local and outside services, being at the longhouse or at school.
Well, this is it. You just will yourself. You're not going to let anything bring you down. You're just going to keep on going the best way you know how.
I see that word she said, extended family. We all have our personal families where we're really close knit, but outside of that, there's the extended family where we have friends. We have friends who have people, you know, aunties or uncles or, you know, brothers or sisters or mothers or fathers that, you know, are able to do things that we can't handle, you know. So that's the extended family, and that's where that circle comes in of how the community helps Kahnawake as a whole. It's the extended family part, the part that the extended family plays in the role of that. You know, like the younger generation, you have teachers, you have like role models of people, you know, who, you know, that they look forward to, they look up to. That's all part of the extended family. That all plays in that part, just like she said.
Some have expressed that the matriarchal nature of our culture contributes to our resilience. Besides gaining strength from family and extended family, younger generations gain strength from their friends at school and from many community resources we have available to us, such as the youth center and the many youth programs. They also indicated seeking and obtaining support from people and resources outside of Kahnawake. Each generation showed distinct ways of communicating and expressing their resilience. Many of our younger people see the value of education and express their resilience through media, such as film and graphic arts. Adults and elders, on the other hand, communicated their resilience through the retelling of significant events that shaped them and the community. They shared their stories of life during the old days, life during the ice storm of '98, life during the Oka crisis, and life on the river before the St. Lawrence Seaway. They also expressed the importance of keeping these stories alive because they are now part of our history and cultural knowledge. Finally, while each individual and even each generation has their own way of getting through challenges, there are several prominent sources of strengths that all generations share. Those are being ongwehunwe and having a strong identity and connection to the land, revitalizing and maintaining our language and culture, and the need and willingness to build stronger relationships and connections with each other. People spoke with one mind, but from multiple voices. The community has expressed that being Mohawk, being Kahnawake, being Ongwehunwe means that within each of us is a wealth of cultural, spiritual, and communal strength, whether we are conscious of it or not. Living a proud Mohawk identity means honoring neighbors, family, and extended family, recognizing and honoring the gifts that the Creator sent us to this earth with, valuing our wealth of resources in Kahnawake, such as education, coming together and togetherness in times of hardship, and ensuring that Kahnawake Hironu know their own history and culture so that it can be passed on to future generations. It has been expressed that we can become stronger if we come together as a community more often.
Like I say to many people, how come it's only when we're in trouble we become one? How come? Why can't we be one all the time? Do I have anything against you because you belong here? No. If you belong to the Longhouse, you belong to Kahnawake, I still love you the same way. You're still my brothers and sister.
Yeah.
Being Mohawk also represents individual and collective strengths that help people be well.
You've got to be grounded in who you are as a human being to be resilient. You have to be grounded in who, and it doesn't mean that you don't fall apart a little bit, but it means that you can pull yourself together and
I think a well person is someone who knows him or herself personally, who is not easily influenced by outside society, who feels what is important is not power, is not money, is not belongings, but a feeling within themselves that this is who they are, this is who I am. I'm a person that the Creator made, and I have gifts.
Education, sticking together,
Okay.
pride. Once you have pride in who you are and what you do and who your people are and what you've accomplished, you're going to want to maintain that integrity.
Being Mohawk also means sticking together, which for many was a way of standing strong.
Like how we got through it is the way we get through everything. Maybe we don't always agree on how we're supposed to do it, but somehow or other we have that ability to knit ourselves together to be able to stand strong and be able to conquer things. We have our people that have their specialties. We have our people that can speak the language. We have our people that are academics who are able to negotiate for us. We have our people who do the ceremonies and everything. As a collective, we are very strong people.
Kahnawake Rono have said that learning, teaching, and using the language is crucial to being Mohawk. Even though the community has had its share of social, political, and cultural obstacles, we all share a deep appreciation for the value and importance of our language, or Ungwehuetneha. While the elders have faith that the younger generations will use and teach the language, the younger generations understand the collective responsibility and express the desire to speak it more often, other than during school hours. Many adults have taken it upon themselves to speak fluently within their homes. Regardless of how well you can speak Mohawk, our spirits know that our culture is in our language and that it must be practiced and kept intact.
So that's the part of resilience that Kahnawake still has, that the Mohawk nation still has, is that resilience of the language.
Yeah.
You know.
Personally, my biggest belief is in language. That's what can really save us. Once you have been given a strong, solid foundation in Kahnawake, everything else falls into place automatically. I don't know anybody, I have never met one single person in my life who hasn't gone out of their way to learn or to remember their language and has not been transformed by it.
One of the challenges identified by all generations is maintaining our identity in the wake of increased individualism and materialism. Just as our riverbank has been eroded and taken from us, people indicated that individualism and materialism is threatening our way of being Mohawk.
But still, individualism overrides nationhood in the way things are right now. We're all in different directions, but we're all from the same place. But we're all heading in different directions. So individualism is overtaking nationhood.
And we have to sort of take the focus off of making money for a little while. It's great, there's not much unemployment in the community, but the sad part about doing that is that it becomes the focus. Making money becomes the focus instead of being a means to achieve something else.
The shift toward individualism and materialism is seen as one of the main causes of not caring for our neighbors, not caring for the community as a whole, and keeping our close family ties.
We went through so much. We grew up, and each generation got a little more. We got a little more information. We got a little more
money coming in because the men were out working, coming home. Women became more independent. You know, and when we had nothing, and this started to come in.
Because a long time ago, everybody in Kahnawake was your grandmother. Everybody was your grandfather.
Yeah.
You know, we have lost that a bit now.
So there you have it. Through these stories, the community of Kahnawake speaks a subconscious one-mindedness, that is, speaking with one mind, but without necessarily realizing it. When you think about it, this one-mindedness is inherent in our traditional teachings, that is, consensus building.
I think deep down inside we all have the same goals, we all have the same objectives.
All age groups essentially want the same thing, to work towards the well-being of our community while upholding our culture and language. Many of us feel deep inside ourselves that our identity is what helps us through challenges and is the glue that helps us stick together. We might use different words or different examples to express it, but deep down everyone's saying the same thing, that being Kahnawake or Mohawk is our source of resilience. Recognizing that we all share this subconscious one-mindedness could help us bridge together different generations and help us maintain our togetherness so we can continue to stand strong not only during times of hardship but on a daily basis.
Someday, when you stand there, you'll fight for me. I won't be here anymore. You still fight for what I was fighting for.
We're resilient because we're Mohawk.